Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. Sex Matters has written a new model policy for schools in an aim to provide guidance on gender-confused children and issues such as pronoun use. Many consider this a grey area as to whether teachers should be legally required to use a child's preferred pronouns. The organisation's policy against such a move explains that if teachers did use a child's preferred pronouns, it would encourage the expectation that the status of the child's sex and requirement to follow sex-based rules have changed or will change during their school career. So with me now to discuss this model policy is the Director of Advocacy at Sex Matters, Helen Joyce. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
So, Helen, we've been looking at this schools guidance for a long time. Schools have been crying out for guidance for ages, and finally the Tory government got round to it. There was a draft form. Where are we now with the guidance?
So the Tory government, as you say, published a draft for consultation. That consultation came back, it was analysed, and the results were sent privately. We haven't seen them to the DfE about a half a second before somebody called a snap election.
Right, I see. So what?
Yes.
So what was the broad element of the guidance, and what sort of things were they suggesting we should do?
They seem to have worked on it for years and years, quite hard, and what they got to the point of was understanding that, you know what, kids are both boys and girls, and boys can't become girls and girls can't become boys.
Right.
They worked out that you can't tell the boys they can use the girls' spaces and vice versa. You can't get the boys to play the girls' sports and vice versa. But they got stuck on this idea that you might call the boys girls and the girls boys.
So that's interesting, because what you're describing there are surely legally protected spaces in schools, and yet we've had a lot of schools just sort of making it up as they go along.
More than making it up as they go along, what they've been doing is taking dictation from the trans lobby. Organisations like Stonewall and Mermaids have claimed that it would be discrimination on grounds of gender reassignment if you don't let a boy who thinks he's a girl use the girl spaces.
Right.
And missing the point that actually there's legal requirements on schools to provide girl-only spaces, and letting boys in would be discrimination on grounds of sex, also very unsafe.
Yes, of course. I mean, it's not just about the potential for sexual assault. We've seen a case going on in County Loudon in Virginia, but also just privacy and dignity, and I'm sure teenage girls just don't want to be sharing their spaces with boys, right?
I mean, you've been a teacher.
Yeah.
Boys and girls are different in many ways, and
Yes.
one of the ways is the boys are messers.
Yes.
And they're messers in the loos as well. Like they do things like, you know, wadding up the toilet paper and throwing it over the top of the toilets and things in a way that girls don't quite do.
No, they're barbarians, I know. That's absolutely true, but...
You said it, not I.
But no, this guidance is really, really important, because I know a lot of school teachers. I used to be a school teacher myself. A lot of people don't know what they should be doing, and a lot of schools appear to have taken the approach that we will socially transition the children.
That's right.
We will use the pronouns they prefer, the names that they prefer. But am I right in thinking that the Cass Review did quite explicitly state that that could be a psychological intervention that could have damaging consequences?
It is a psychological intervention. And the Cass Review said, yes, that could be. But it's not quite exactly that we're saying. We're saying schools are institutions that deal with children. Children can't change sex. Everybody has a sex. Everybody has sex-based rules. Mm-hmm. So mostly you don't discriminate between children on the basis of their sex. You don't, like, it's not like when I was a little girl and you taught the boys woodworking and the girls cooking. You know, that would be direct sex discrimination. We don't do that anymore.
Yes.
So when you separate boys and girls, when you have a rule about boys and girls, there always has to be a reason. And that reason can't be set aside because that child is confused about their sex, because the reason has to have been there for something meaningful.
Yes.
So you would be putting the trans-identifying child or the gender-confused child outside the normal framework that is there for a reason. And that reason is often to keep children safe.
So then what do you do with a child who is suffering from confusion, and they feel that if a teacher doesn't use their preferred pronouns, that is a form of abuse or an insulting approach?
That one's a difficult one, especially if you've already started down that path, and we think that the DfE is going to have to give schools guidance on how to wind back from when they've got this wrong.
Yes.
But when it comes down to it, the fact is there are sex-based rules, and, you know, rules are written in words, and they're conveyed in words, and teachers make sure that children are sticking to the rules by using words. So if you say, oh, this boy is really a girl, and I'm going to call him she, but he's not allowed to go into the girls' spaces. Like, how are you doing this? There's a sort of a contradiction here that you're saying, you know, Priscilla's a lovely girl like all the other girls, but she's the sort of girl who can't go into the girls' toilets. Well, what's the reason? Well, because she's that sort of girl.
Yes.
No, it's because she's a boy. You know?
Well, I don't think people appreciate what's been going on in schools. I mean, I had a school teacher friend of mine saying that he was told by his head mistress to lie to the parents, effectively. In other words, use the names that the child wanted, but not to do so on the report home.
Yep.
That really compromises the teacher's, ethical position, doesn't it?
So that's a good link to something else that this government has got right. I mean, you asked what's happening with the school's guidance, and the answer is that it's with the DfE. And I mean, I'm not worried about that. There's been a summer, there's been an election, we're now in autumn. I hope that they're going to deal with it. And, you know, I don't think they've delayed at this point. What they have done that's really, really good is they have finalised something else that sounds like a really small technical thing, but is actually very large. So alongside this school's guidance, there's a separate thing which is called Keeping Children Safe in Education. That's statutory guidance, and it's the most important thing that teachers do. It's about safeguarding.
And that's from the DfE?
Yes. And as I say, it's statutory. If a teacher disobeys this, that's disciplinary and you could get struck off.
Right.
Right? And in it, at the behest of Stonewall, some years ago, they put in a thing that said if a child is LGBT, that's not a safeguarding risk. But LGBT and T are different.
Yes.
Like, LGB isn't in itself a safeguarding risk. Like a child's, and usually a teenager's sexuality isn't in itself a safeguarding risk. The risk might be if there's an adult, usually a man, grooming or interacting the wrong way, and that's a safeguarding risk. T is pretty much always a safeguarding risk.
Right. Can you explain why?
Well, T means that you think, if you're a boy, you think you might be a girl, or you're unhappy being a boy, and the other way around.
Yes.
You might be looking for drugs online, you might be talking to strangers online, you might want to breast bind. At the very least, you're not comfortable in yourself.
Yes.
So that's the sort of thing you'd tell a parent.
Of course.
But schools, as you say, have been under this impression that it's something you don't talk to parents about because you might out the child.
Right.
That's what might be the danger.
And that's very interesting because the idea of LGBT, as you say, these are very, very different ideas. The idea of sexual orientation and gender identity have nothing at all to do with each other. So actually that's a really significant linguistic shift, isn't it?
It is, and they aren't even saying T. What they're saying is children with gender distress or children who are unhappy about their sex, or I forget the exact wording, but they're moving away from the concept that there is such a thing as a trans child.
Yes.
And it really gives me heart that the DfE is doing this because, you know, I bet you that was a fight behind the scenes. You know, I don't know, but it was a fight behind the scenes under the Tories, so I bet you it's a fight now.
Yes, absolutely. Well, let's talk a bit about that because the Labour government, historically speaking, or at least I say historically, the last 10 years or so, have not been really on top of these issues. They've been very disappointing when it comes to the gender identity issue. They seem to be taking this kind of this faith in such a thing as gender identity and saying that's more important than sex. But we've seen a slight change now with Wes Streeting's response to the Cass review. Do you think that Labour is moving in the right direction on this?
Well, I'd start by saying that I think that most politicians have been very disappointing.
Yeah.
I mean, remember, the Tories were in government since 2010. All of this happened under their watch.
Yes.
You know, we cannot say, oh, they were doing brilliantly and in comes Labour to mess it all up.
Absolutely.
Theresa May was the person who wanted gender self-ID. But as you say, Wes Streeting really does seem to get it. So he, he accepted the findings of the Cass review. He has continued the ban on puberty blockers. And that's under a great deal of pressure. So Jolyon Maugham's Good Law Project, for example, Jolyon Maugham tweeted about how parents would be coming and putting the ashes of their children outside the Department of Health if Wes Streeting continued in the path that he was going.
That's such a reckless thing to say.
I know, and I know what this is like. I personally know what it's like when people say that because of what I say, I'm causing the deaths of children. It's the most painful thing someone can say to you. It's a wicked and vicious thing to do, and Wes Streeting has had that since he became Health Secretary, and he has stood up. And
that's something that the Cass review did directly address. There is no evidence for this this idea that these children will kill themselves unless you use the names they want you to use.
More than that, the evidence is that's not correct.
Right.
Like, we've debunked that. That was a false claim.
That's hugely significant as well, because that has been a thing that has been parroted by politicians over and over. A lot of it's fear, isn't it, I suppose? Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that the worst thing that could happen as a parent is that your child dies, and my sympathy goes out to anyone this has happened to in any circumstances. Of course. You know, as a parent myself, I can't imagine the pain they're going through. Yes. But to then use that fear of that pain to basically manipulate and emotionally blackmail parents into doing something that we now know does not help. Yes. It's a wicked thing to do. But we've seen, haven't we, so many groups just ignoring the evidence of the Cass review. We saw with the BMA, of course, we were discussing that earlier in the show. So is anything actually going to change? Because I know when the draft consultation period was underway, there were activist groups telling teachers you should ignore the guidelines. Is this thing that is it just impervious at this point?
I mean, it took a long time to get it in. I think of it as like bindweed or Japanese knotweed, you know, and I spent the afternoon gardening. If anyone could see my nails, they're a disgrace. They all broke and they're all dirty. You know, pulling weeds out is just an endless task. And what happened is we allowed this to spread everywhere and now we have to pick it out. I do think we can do it, but I think we just have to keep pushing. And it really heartens me that Wes Streeting understands that. And then that Bridget Phillipson at the DfE has kept this guidance about keeping children safe. I hope that that's a sign that the school's guidance will be good too. And what we've done in our model policy, the point of it is to operationalise what the DfE's draft guidance will say.
Yes.
Because every bit of ambiguity gets manipulated and taken advantage of by the trans lobby.
So you're saying you should foolproof this, in other words?
Yes, and what we would like to see is that the DfE says to schools, to school leaders who are often much more sensible than school teachers because they're the ones who talk to the lawyers and the insurers and the like, we're saying to the DfE, operationalise this, write a model policy, tell schools that if they follow it and they get sued, because of course there are activist parents as well, we'll stand behind you.
Right.
And then schools will step in line. It won't matter whether it's statutory or non-statutory. What schools want to know is to be told what to do and to be told it's legally safe.
Yes. Well, Helen, thanks for clarifying that for us. Is there any way that people can find out more about it on the Sex Matters website?
Yes, if you go to our website, which is sex-matters.org, you can download it. And we'd love people, absolutely love it if you gave it to your own school and went in to talk to them about it.
Fantastic. Helen Joyce, thanks so much for joining me.